our favorite herb, we keep it in a cookie tin. And we'll keep on smoking on our 10-foot bong until the feds come busting in. We're a bunch of wasted hippies! A bunch of wasted hippies! A bunch of wasted hippies! Bill smoked a hit and he danced a bit. He spilled the bong water on the floor. So he went into the sink and filled it back up. Then he said, let's smoke some more. He's another wasted hippie! Another wasted hippie! Another wasted hippie! Wasted hippie, gotta hold on me. Wasted hippie, gotta hold on you. Wasted hippie, gotta hold on me. Wasted hippie, gotta hold on to football.
Hello everyone, I'm Jim Davies from Ridgefield and welcome to another edition of The Freedom Alternative. Yes, this is the same program you normally watch at this time. There's no mistake, though if you are part of our regular audience, you may have noticed a change to the introductory sequence. Our regular picture of Candlewood Lake with music from Dvorak's Ninth Symphony, From the New World, is in the shop for repairs. So for this week only, we showed a picture of Main Street Ridgefield on April 15th. And we played music from an album called Those Melvins, a Fairfield County band published by our guest today, Jason Szostek of New Britain. We hope you liked it. The track was called Wasted Hippies. Why, though, you may wonder, a street scene on April 15th? Well, you remember that we, with the Libertarian Party of Connecticut and the Citizens for Limited Taxation group, asked people to drive all day tax day with their headlights on as a protest against the state income tax. As you see from the film, most people did exactly that. The Headlights On campaign was a success, thanks to you. But we do need to ask your help one more time. Write to your state representative and make it very clear that, however it gets there, if there's a state income tax in force come next election, he or she will face certain defeat. The politicians are not open to reason. That is the only kind of language they hear. You may have until mid-May. Please don't waste that opportunity.
Our featured guest today is Jason Szostek from New Britain. Jason is a talented young man who, instead of going to college, chose to start his own small business. He runs a record publishing company. He has a great deal to tell us about a major part of our culture, pop music, and about the sinister way it is influenced by government. Let's go over now and meet with Jason Szostek.
Well, Jason Szostek, thank you very much for joining us on the Freedom Alternative. You graduated from high school when? About how long ago was that?
1986.
86, okay, 5 years ago. And at that time, what were you interested in doing when you left the educational establishment?
Well, I had already been a musician, composer for several years, and I decided to pursue a course in being a full-time professional musician, an electronic musician.
You compose music?
Right.
That's a pretty unusual profession.
Well, yeah, I guess it's relatively rare, but that's how I choose to describe myself. Most people just say that they're a musician.
Okay. And what in what way did you compose? I believe you said earlier you had computers.
I'm an electronic musician. I compose on the computer and use computerized instruments.
And what with this profession when you left school?
Yes, I started a small recording studio called Techno Rebel in my home in New Britain with another partner, and we were a commercial operation for a couple of years, and then we split ways and did a few albums of material together, and then I started a record company.
And what's the name of that record company?
Turn of the Century Records.
Turn of the Century. Yeah. And you're still operating that now?
That's right.
Now, what does a record company do? How does it fit into the entertainment business? Give me a quick background.
Well, record companies generally are like banks. I mean, they...
Like banks?
They finance... Generally, they don't do much except a lot of paperwork and a lot of money laundering.
Oh, you're in a good position then,
no,
financially.
I'm not. I'm not at all, because I use other people's money. That's
right.
the first rule when you're operating a small business. But basically, we finance the manufacture and promotion and distribution of pre-recorded music media, either CDs, records, cassettes, videos, etc. And our job is first in A&R to find artists that are compatible with our marketing strategy, to help them produce a sellable, marketable product, to package that, to get it manufactured, and then to promote it, which is the basic crux of our operation, is in promotion, which is getting it out to the various media outlets that will advertise its existence, either free or otherwise, on a radio or through magazines or through television, to let the consumer know that this new product is available and that they can go and buy it.
So you're dealing with generally newly published music, is that correct?
Well, 9 times out of 10, we're dealing with new artists who've never even released anything before, and in some cases, some artists of standing.
Okay. And is this generally what I might call pop music?
In a broad kind of way, pop, classical, jazz, but I mean, we like to consider it sub-pop, new music. There are a lot of labels have been given. Alternative is a label that's bantered about, even though I think it's rather vague to get from them.
Okay. Would I be perhaps correct in describing it as leading-edge pop music?
Leading edge, yeah. On the cutting-edge music, stuff that is somewhat countercultural, somewhat unique.
Right. So some succeeds and some doesn't, presumably.
Oh yeah, well, it's a very risky, especially when you're dealing. It's hard to tell what the cutting edge is until you get there, and then it's usually too late.
Right. Now, both of us know, because we're both in business, that running your own business, starting your own business is not an easy thing. There are some risks attached and so forth. What I want to ask you is, in what particular ways, if any, does government and its regulations and laws and taxes and all make it more difficult in your business, publishing music, new music, than it would otherwise be under what we've called on the program the freedom alternative, where no such regulations and taxes existed?
I found that there are 6 basic general ways the government makes my job and any small independent label's job more difficult, and that there are 2 major categories of that they fit into, and one is those that are common to most small businesses, and the other category is those that are more unique to the record company situation.
Okay.
The 3 most basic ways that are common to most businesses are simply local and state regulations that make the running of a small business expensive and difficult. The various regulations I have to go through in order to operate a business out of my home, the various harassment I have to take from
Such as what, for instance?
Zoning officials, being concerned that I have too much inventory in my home, or too many deliveries in front of my house.
They tell you what you can hold in your own home?
Certainly, if it gets to an extent where neighbors are complaining, which has not yet happened because I have a very good relationship with my neighbors.
Common to all small businesses.
That's common to most small businesses run out of their home. And there are regulations that restrict the distribution of my sales units, my product, and makes it more expensive than I believe it would otherwise be.
What would an example be here, quickly?
An example would be how difficult I am eventually servicing record retailers who sell their records to the consumers via retail outlets. The same restrictions that I face, they face in zoning laws, property taxes, and high rents that are inflated by the government that make it more difficult for them to offer more product. Therefore, they have to artificially restrict the amount of product that they offer to the public because of space constraints and the costs involved in that, which squeeze out various, let's say, less profitable, not unprofitable, but slightly less profitable product, such as mine, that may only sell a few units a week in favor of those that are backed by the larger corporations that
It is interesting, isn't it? You're creating, as we said, a leading edge to the business, or trying to, and is that very operation which these regulations tend to make more difficult than the established business?
Well,
this must have effect on a bad effect on the creation of new music.
Well, there's definitely an underlying strategy and a collusion on the part of major corporations with the government and regulatory agencies to make things more difficult for the smaller competition, to suppress and to oppress their ability to bring new and somewhat groundbreaking and shattering work available to the consumer, because that would threaten their long-established traditional mode of operations,
and no doubt profitable,
and their profit.
Yeah. What other points were you going to mention?
The institutional bias toward corporations and the liability and the tax structure that's created by the IRS that favors venture capital for corporations and discourages it away from smaller businesses that are sole proprietorships or partnerships,
Yeah.
and how that restricts my supply of credit and makes it more difficult for me to grow and
Yeah.
expand and compete in the marketplace.
Is there any way the government makes brings a hazard into the actual performance of the product in some way? I'm thinking here. We did a program 3 or 4 weeks ago with regard to the subsidy of classical music performance and so forth, and we touched there upon the subject of censorship. Is there censorship of this kind of music that you're dealing with?
Well, there's two types of censorship. There's overt and covert censorship. The one I like to concentrate on in regards to running a record company is the more subtler covert form of censorship, which is basically the restriction of the supply of promotional venues, of the media that we have access to advertise the availability of our product, and how that's a de facto sense of censorship, meaning that my product is played less because it is deemed somewhat dangerous, or certainly to the major corporations and to the establishment, and by various special interest groups that have their own hidden agenda about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to hear,
but
what is quote or unquote offensive, and that there are de facto ways built into the system of preventing my music from getting heard.
And what would one or two of these ways be?
Well, the most important one is the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission.
And how do they do it?
Which the way they do it is they license radio and television stations, and to have a license, you're required to meet all kinds of incredibly restrictive criteria, and most of which are designed to eliminate and restrict competition, because the FCC's original premise when it was first put in place was to prevent anarchy on the airwaves, is what they claimed.
That was their phrase, I imagine.
That was their problem. They envisioned a situation where unless you said that a radio station could exist at this frequency at this number of watts, everybody would be all over the dial on top of each other. You wouldn't be able to hear anything, and there would be just total disorder and chaos.
Now, I can understand that argument. Is there an answer to it?
Well, the fact is the market would have created its own order. It's simply that those stations that were the most popular or had the most money to finance themselves would have the ability always to get the more powerful transmitter and block out the stations that could not afford to compete.
How would the market,
These
would there been any,
stations.
would you advocate no kind of law whatever about the use of the airwaves in that?
I certainly do not support any regulation of the airwaves, and it only inevitably leads to restriction.
It's difficult to understand then how there would not be an anarchy of the airwaves where you would be unable to listen clearly to any one station.
It would just become natural. I mean, it would become simply a power war among stations about who could put out the most amount of power.
Would there be any
particular
rights?
frequency.
I mean, if you were broadcasting on a particular frequency, would you have any rights
There
to
is
that?
one basic right which I believe would limit the amount of power that you could emit, and that is the right from being inundated by radio waves, which would be an invasion on your
But if you were a
personal
broadcaster
property.
and you had, say, 1500 AM or something,
Mm-hmm.
would you have a right to that, or would that be a purchasable right of any kind? Would it be a property thing?
No.
You would not visualize. There are some libertarians who would see that as a desirable alternative to the present scene, where you would have rights to broadcast on a certain frequency.
There are many desirable alternatives that would be more or less better than the system that we have.
There would be sort of property rights in particular frequency
Right, but
bands
I
and so
don't-
on that
I
you
don't
can buy and
support
sell.
them.
You would feel that we can do without those altogether.
Yes, I do. I believe the market would create its own order.
Very interesting.
Simply through the process of elimination and through competition.
Yeah, interesting.
That you would have to be marketing a product that was interesting enough for your listeners in order to get the advertising revenue that you needed, to support the power of the station that you needed, to push aside the competition. And if the competition was to come up with a better marketing strategy, to come up with better music that more people were more interested in, there'd be more freedom and power with your dollars as a consumer and as a listener, because they would be more going after pleasing you, the listener, than basically fulfilling a marketing niche as defined by the Federal Communications Commission, which has a totally alternative agenda that has nothing to do with the pleasure of the listener.
Jason, you're into music videos as well as audio records. What are the particular ways, or pick a particular way, the government makes this aspect of your business more difficult than it otherwise would be?
Well, it makes it, the FCC makes it almost impossible for me to find any decent use for music videos. I try to make music videos to sell them to consumers through the underground mail order industry.
Oh, yeah?
But the best use for a music video is in promotion. Major labels get tons of free promotion by airing their videos on MTV, which is a monopoly that was created by the FCC, allowing only one company to do music videos on any particular cable system, and making it almost impossible, because that's what their license for operation was granted for. And basically the money, the economics involved with how many cable systems you have available to you, which is one, because of the SEC regulation and state regulation of cable that only allows one cable
one system in
area,
one area, yes.
per area, and the availability of the channels and the cost involved in that.
So if they wanted to go to another company apart from MTV, they couldn't do that, is that right?
It's virtually impossible. There are a few public access shows that have propped up showing alternative music videos.
Yeah.
But the MTV really has a stranglehold, either partly through FCC regulation, partly with their collusion with the major record labels, and that arrangement that they have, which has basically squeezed out the independents from ever showing their videos on MTV. And making
That's
it
fascinating. So this is a private company, MTV, but because government has, through the FCC, given them a monopoly, they've got a monopoly. Could they sustain a monopoly any other way if government was not regulating
No, no. I mean, even if there was only one cable system, which wouldn't happen if the FCC was out of the business of regulating cable, you could certainly, the market could certainly support several music television alternatives.
I think so.
The only music television, national music television alternative is VH1, which is owned by MTV. So there's really only one national.
So if you've got a leading edge music video to promote, and you can't for some reason sell it to MTV, you're stuck.
Basically, yeah. There's no way that I can get it on a music only television channel for consumers of music media,
and they
would
don't
see that, and it would be it's perfect, beautiful, free advertising for the product. And the majors are taking advantage of this definite advantage because of their relationship. When you only have one, and there's a monopoly, there's a tendency to cater to the lowest common denominator.
I can imagine.
It's simple business sense. And therefore the lowest common denominator is always the one that has the most amount of money and the most amount of promotion behind it. And that would be run by the majors. There would be plenty of room for another music television station to survive, simply catering to independents, because they represent, by all estimates, 15 to 20% of the music media that's sold, which is quite considerable amount of money. And they could, producing a music video is not a very expensive thing to do. I don't even bother to produce as many music videos as I perhaps could, simply because there's nothing for me to do with them. I could be showing them on MTV if MTV wasn't such a blatant monopoly.
But this is a kind of censorship by the back door.
Oh, it's
it
definitely
doesn't call censorship, but it is.
That's an example of the covert censorship that exists in radio, in radio licensing, and in MTV. And
quickly, because we're running short of time, tell us about overt censorship and how much damage, if you feel it is doing damage, it's doing to the industry.
Well, overt censorship has been focused primarily on us, the independent labels, because we are the ones who are the most vulnerable to litigation because of the very tight budgetary restraints we have. We do not have the capital to invest in defending ourselves. The most classic example for me is Jello Biafra, lead singer of the Dead Kennedys, who had his own label called Alternative Tentacles, which by any estimation is a very successful independent label and still exists to this day, which was almost run out of business simply because they had to spend 3 years in and out of court defending themselves against lawsuits filed by a mother who claimed that her daughter killed herself because of pictures that were contained inside the record that they bought that was put out by the Dead Kennedys. And it was essentially a piece of art by Robert Mapplethorpe that was made up of penises. And that this was found offensive by her and her organization, the PMRC, that was backing her, and the various organizations that were trying to harass Jello Biafra's label. But the fact remains that this person bought this record of their own free will, paid for it, and became their personal property, and that Alternative Tentacles had every right in the world to release this under the First Amendment, but still had to deal with the battle in court that it involved. And these types of battles, whether it be Two Live Crew of Luke Skywalker records, which were basically being harassed in Florida for their Nasty As They Wanna Be record, which contains an extremely explicit language that some deemed offensive, but was yet selling by the millions.
They were free not to buy it if they didn't like it,
They were
right?
certainly free not to buy it. They were free not to listen to it when it came on the radio, but certain groups found it necessary to squash it out altogether. And to ban it altogether, and they are again a small indie label.
What's an indie label?
An independent label is a label that doesn't have any distribution connections or is part of any major corporate cartels.
You'd be an indie label, right?
I'm an indie label. Warner Brothers is part of Warner Communications Inc., which is a division of Time Life, which is not a major label. They've got a stranglehold on marketing and distribution in this country. They are a major label. We are an independent. The censorship is being used as a tool to squash out competition among indie labels, the competition that indie labels give major labels.
If there were no indie labels, do you think that the majors would accommodate and promote new styles of music, new genres of music?
No, independent labels force major labels to take seriously a new cutting-edge style of music.
So the net effect, am I right?
To nullify the competition of these independent labels.
So am I right? The net effect of this interference with a free market is to suppress the development of new styles of music.
Exactly, because it's basically part of an entire corporate plan that they have invested large amounts of money in a particular style. They would like that style.
Oh, I can understand that motivation.
They would like that style to last forever.
I can understand that motivation, but they couldn't do it without government, am I right?
It would be impossible.
It would be impossible,
It would be impossible.
We've got to go. I hope you'll come again on the Freedom Alternative.
I'd love to.
Jason, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jim, for having me.
Let's take a look at what perhaps are the three most important points discussed in the interview with Jason Szostek. Number one, in a free entertainment market, you decide what gets published, not the government. Number two, big publishers help government censor so as to exclude small competitors. Number three, a great deal of censorship is by the back door. The FCC, which causes it, should be abolished. Now, as promised last week, we're going to give you the opportunity to rate yourself on the Nolan chart. Here it is again. Remember, this axis measures how much economic freedom you want, and this other axis measures how much personal freedom you want. The two together, as we showed, provide a good measure of how much freedom anyone really believes in. Here are the questions to help you place yourself on this chart. Please have a pencil and paper ready, or if you have a VCR at home, you could put in a tape and record this program so that you can answer them later, perhaps with other members of your household. The scoring is easy. You score 20 for each yes, meaning you agree with the statement, 0 for each no, and 10 for each maybe. Here are 5 questions about personal freedom and 5 about economic freedom. Let's take the 5 personal ones first. 1. Military service should be voluntary. That is, there should be no draft. Score 20 if you agree, 0 if you disagree, or 10 if you're not sure. Statement number 2. Drug laws do more harm than good. Repeal them. Same procedure. Number 3. Citizens should be allowed to own handguns. Take the time now to score the same way. Statement number 4. End sex legislation for consenting adults. Number 5. Include TV and radio in freedom of the press. Did you get all those done? Good. Now let's move on to the 5 questions about economic freedom, and keep this score separate. First statement, sell the post office, allow competition. Number 2, remove tariffs and other barriers to free trade. Statement number 3, government should not legislate prices or wages. Go ahead and score that one. And 4, end government welfare. Hand it over to charitable organizations. And statement number 5, the last one, end farm subsidies and production restrictions. And once again, remember, score 20 if you agree, 0 if you disagree, and 10 if you're not sure. Now, the final step is to add up your scores for each of the 5 questions and plot them on a rough sketch of the Nolan chart. For instance, if you scored 50 on personal freedom questions and 70 on economic ones, you'd be here on the chart. Or if you had 80 on personal freedom and 60 on economic, you'd be over here. Notice, if you're anywhere in this upper right quadrant called the libertarian quadrant, you'd be pretty close to believing in freedom. Hitler, Stalin, and Saddam Hussein would all be down here in the totalitarian quadrant. I hope that none of our viewers find themselves in that one. But conservatives are over here, and liberals or socialists are over here in this area. Well, how did you do? Where do you fit? Here's a request. If you scored 70 or more in both halves, we'd love to hear from you. You're one of us. And if you scored 10 for any of the questions, you need more information. So call us and we'll help. The number is 1-257-4844. Again, that's 1-257-4844. Jim?
Thank you, Peter. Join us, won't you, next week, same time, same station, same day, for another edition of the Freedom Alternative. We have some things already in preparation. There are going to be some interviews with some bikers about what they think concerning helmet laws that the government wants to thrust down their throats, and we'll show you another self-scoring quiz to find out how much you think government is worth to you. Until then, this is Jim Davies.
And I'm Peter Verderosa. Join us next week for a great different choice. It's called the Freedom Alternative. Good night, everybody.
1, 2! We got them under the favorite curve. We keep it in